Welcome to Eye on the Bay. My name is Mike Lehman and I will be the host of Eye on the Bay, a local program about local issues with local guests. If you have questions for people on the show, or you have guests you would like to see or topics you would like to see discussed, please send us an email at eyeonthebay541@gmail.com. Hi, my name is Mike Lehman, and this is the actual first show of Eye on the Bay. And our guest today is Melissa Cribbins, who is the county commissioner.
And we can always say, I remember when, right?
Yes.
It was the very first show.
The inaugural show.
Yes, it's an honor to be your first guest. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Melissa, you've been a county commissioner for how long?
9 years this year.
9 years.
I'm starting my 9th year, yes.
What made you want to be a county commissioner?
I think many of us have the same path. You live in the county, you believe in the county. I grew up here in Coos County, and you think that you could add value, that you could make things better, and so you run for office to try to make things better for people.
What was the first office you ever ran for? Do you remember before county commissioner? Or did you
No, this was it.
This is the first
This
one?
is the first office I
Not
ever ran
student
for.
body president?
Oh, I
class
did
council?
do that, yeah. I was student body treasurer,
Really?
I think. Yes, and then I went to Girls State my senior year of high school, or junior year, whatever year you do that. And I was actually looking back. I found that book the other day, and I was state senator when I was there. So at least I did win state senator at some point in my life.
Wow. Well, so you have a
You can
history.
laugh at that.
Your history of no. I think I lost every office I ever ran for until I ran for school boards.
Oh, really? So
yeah.
you started out school board?
Yes.
For Coos Bay?
Yep. Coos Bay
Nice.
School. Yep.
Yeah. It's a good, I tell people all the time that I think everybody should run for office at some point in their life. There is something very educational as a citizen about learning what it's like to be on the other side of that podium and make those decisions and try to do what's best for everybody, even if sometimes, maybe it's not what you think you would want to do. If you were ruler of the world, you would do things differently, but a lot of times we find that our hands are very tied as local elected officials. We try to make changes, but the whole world of changes aren't open to you. You're bound by the United States Constitution and the Oregon Constitution and Oregon laws and decisions that other people have made before you.
We
Or
talked
at
the
least
other
you're
day
supposed
that running for office is also very personal, because it's a referendum on you.
Absolutely.
And when you win, it's usually a team that does it.
Yeah.
When you lose, it's like, that was me they voted on. So
Yeah.
it becomes very difficult sometimes to put yourself out there, and as you have done, and do that.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and you lose, especially in small towns, you lose a little bit of privacy because everybody knows who you are. I mean, that's part of the point of local politics is, when you're in the grocery store, you expect to answer questions. If people have questions about decisions that you've made, or, right now the big question is, when am I going to get vaccinated? And that's the question I find myself answering all the time for people. And it's been such a moving target. It's really hard to tell people when they're going to be vaccinated because it's dependent upon how many vaccines we get and, what the state timetable is. And so there's not always a great answer.
When the President of the United States doesn't know and the governor of the state doesn't know, it's kind of hard for a county commissioner to say, well, I know exactly.
It would be nice if the county commissioners knew all.
When you look ahead to 2021, what do you generally see for Coos County in 2021?
2021 will be an interesting year. I think we were all glad to get 2020 behind us. But of course, there were some good things. I think it's important that we look at lessons learned when we go through this. One of the big things for us has been kind of streamlining the way that we do business and realizing that we could be a little more flexible in the way we hold meetings. We have our meetings on YouTube right now, as well as having our meetings on public access to try to get as many people as we can to watch our meetings. In 2021, we'll be doing more of that. It's a legislative session, so we'll also be testifying remotely. which is great because that's always a constraint when you live here in Coos County or any rural county. It's 3 hours to Salem and 3 hours back to testify for 3 minutes. It's hard to make that kind of justification. It has to be a bill that you really, really care about to get in the car and drive that far. So, we'll be engaged in the legislative process and in testifying on that. We're closing the North Bend Annex. It's actually closed now, and we have it on the market. We are doing some remodeling to get all of our facilities in one place. It's a big cost savings for the citizens of Coos County. It's at least $40,000 a year that we pay just in utility bills. And every time we have some catastrophic failure, it just seems like it gets more and more expensive to try to save that building.
And that building is a big chunk of downtown North Bend as well. So
it is.
Do you have an idea of what's going to happen there, or what will go in that site when the county leaves it?
We don't yet. The county is completely out. I believe that the building probably needs to be demolished. I don't know that there's any saving it because it used to be a hospital before it was a county building, and there's a lot of asbestos and lead pipes. I always like to tell people, though, it's a fixer-upper opportunity, right? We want somebody to come in and buy it. We want somebody to redevelop the site. I think it's a really nice site. It's very large. It's right on a main road. And there's a lot of opportunity there. And we also have the parking lots that are across the street. So there's a lot of parking. I think it will be a great site for redevelopment. Right now, we're just looking for somebody who's interested in redeveloping it.
When you look ahead to 2021, do you see any pitfalls out there for the county that you're concerned about for this year?
Yeah, I think there's always pitfalls. What's the saying? No man's pocketbook is safe when the legislature is in session. So there's a lot of cuts that are being talked about right now, especially in public safety, and we're worried about that because that directly impacts the county's budget. So we're keeping a close eye on that. We are hoping that vaccines roll out smoothly and that a lot of people choose to get vaccinated because that will help get us through this pandemic as quickly as possible. The county budget is always an issue. We were just setting dates for the county budget right now. The Shutter Creek closure that's proposed, we're lobbying on that and trying to keep Shutter Creek open. But then,
from a job standpoint,
a job standpoint, frankly,
how many people are employed up there?
90 people. It's 90 family wage jobs. It'll be a big impact to the county when and if the closure happens. I think it's important that we start having conversations about if it does close, then what next? Because we need to have a plan for what to do with that site next. It would be a real shame. It's 50 acres out there. It's a nice facility. It would be a shame if it closed.
Lots of buildings, facilities.
Yeah, and it's actually, the state is running the correctional facility, but I got confirmation today that it is in fact owned by the federal government. So you know how it is. When something goes back into the federal estate, it's really difficult to get the federal government to then pay attention and take care of it. So as a county, we're getting engaged in the conversations early on to make sure that if it does in fact go back to the federal government, that we're making sure that it moves forward with getting it back out and getting it back into circulation.
I think, dating myself a bit, I think that was actually an old post-war Air Force base for radar installation. I think
was.
My father was actually stationed there for a very brief period of time.
Really?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
Is that how you guys came to Coos
No,
County?
unrelated to that actually, but one time he'd been stationed there for a while. So.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I was reading the deed last night. It was through the military department, and there was some cleanup that the state had to do when they took it over, but that's all been resolved. And yeah, it's a nice facility. If they choose not to use it as a prison, and if we're not able to convince our legislators to save it, then there needs to be some plan for what's next.
Great location, kind of out of the way, but
it is a little out of the way, but yeah, a beautiful spot.
If you're sitting here a year from now, in the same interview, looking back at 2021, what do you hope you're able to say a year from now about Coos County and 2021?
My hope is that we'll be able to help small businesses through what's left of this pandemic. So if I'm looking back from 2021, I would like to say that the pandemic's over, that the economy is doing better than ever, and that the county budget is in a more stable position than it was a year ago. That's always my effort, is You know, I feel like one of the biggest things that we do as county commissioners, and our most important job, is funding the services that our citizens need. You know, we're responsible for making sure that that budget balances and that our citizens are getting what they need as part of the budget process.
What, talking about COVID, what do you think has been the biggest impact on the county, particularly, first of all, just the county overall, but secondly, on county government, the biggest impact of COVID for this past year?
As far as the county overall, I think it's been, you know, just trying to deal with all the different closures and the changing regulations. It's been a real struggle. It's made us think hard about how we communicate with our citizens, because there's a lot of times, and you know this, you feel like you're over communicating with people and pushing out all this information, and everybody must know these things already, but we learn that, you know, different people have different ways of getting their information from the government. And so we find that we often have to over communicate in order to make sure that everybody's getting the messages that we put out. From a county government specifically point of view, I think we've struggled with a lot of the challenges that other businesses have struggled with. How do you keep your employees safe? How do you make sure you're meeting all these OSHA requirements? You know, how do you make sure that you don't end up with major impacts from the pandemic in your workplace? You know, the last thing that we want to have to do is quarantine a bunch of our employees and have to shut down offices because we're not able to keep them staffed, which is the same thing that other businesses are struggling with.
When you look at the impacts of COVID, are there things that you've learned from this, or the county has learned from this going forward that, oh, that's a mistake we won't make again?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I think we've all learned a lot. It's easy to Monday morning quarterback it and look back and think, oh, I wish we hadn't done this or had done that.
You can never have too much toilet paper.
Yes, right. Toilet paper was a big thing. I would have bought canning jar lids early, right? We missed that one. You know, cleaning supplies, all those things that just flew off the shelf. We have really tried to be proactive from the county side. I never thought that we would have our emergency operations center in action for this long. I would have encouraged employees to try to, you know, moderate how much time they were spending. You know, we've talked a lot lately about how this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. And at the beginning of the pandemic, we really treated it like a sprint. We had a lot of people that were working a lot of hours, and people got very tired and very burned out because they were working more hours than they should have. So
it seems odd right now. We're sitting here almost a year from this start. I mean, basically about 11 months from this all really started hitting. And in one sense, it seems like it's gone quickly. In another sense, it seems like it's been forever.
it does.
Is that the experience you're having at the county, looking back, going, how did we get here?
Yeah, I think we're all having that same experience. I remember I was in Washington, D.C. on a trip to meet with our legislators when we got the first case in Oregon. And it was about then that they started, there were several other county commissioners from other counties back there with me, and we started talking about, you know, they might shut down the airports. We might have to rent a van to drive home. And it seemed very surreal at that point that that could even happen. And I think now, in retrospect, it's easy to look at it and say, well, you know, this is clearly the path that things have gone. But unfortunately, we didn't have a clear path forward at that time, or an idea of what the fiscal and health impacts were going to be of COVID over this long year that we've had.
And it seemed like in Coos County particularly, I can remember you and I talking about a year ago when the outbreak was at Shutters Creek at the time. And I can remember the conversation was we were relatively unimpacted, and it felt for about 4 months that we didn't see much of anything, and then all of a sudden it's kind of seemed like it's hit with a rush. In the last 4 or 5 months, the numbers have gone up.
Right.
How has the county responded to that?
I think our staff has done an amazing job responding to it. You know, citizens generally are tired of the pandemic, which we all understand. I think there's a lot of, you know, people can only keep up that level of anxiety for so long before there's a lot of fatigue. And we're seeing a lot of fatigue in our citizens. People are tired of worrying about infectious diseases, frankly. And I've been nothing but impressed with our county staff and their ability to continue working on this day after day, month after month at this point, and the work that they've done and their level of professionalism, constantly searching for solutions. Right now we have drive-up testing clinics that are getting ready to happen over the next few days. We have one in Lakeside and one in Coos Bay. We've partnered with Coast Community Health to do some down in Bandon, Port Orford, and Langlois, just to better service that area, because we know a lot of people from Northern Curry tend to come up to Coos County to do their shopping and medical needs. And so we're kind of ignoring county boundaries and saying, doesn't matter. These are citizens that are in our kind of watershed. And so we're trying to reach out and just make sure that people are getting taken care of generally.
It's really difficult. The fatigue is worn in, but I think all of us are in the spot where I don't want to be the guy that got COVID 2 weeks before I was due to get a vaccine.
Right.
And so there's that pressure of, I want to do something, but I don't want to have to tell my kids, oh, by the way, I was stupid that last week and got sick.
Right.
So.
And it happens. I mean, that's the thing is, there was a statement from the Oregon Health Authority early on, just the fact that a vaccine exists doesn't make you any safer than you are, right at this moment. You need to act like there's no vaccine until you've got the vaccine.
When you look back at COVID and the changes it's made, both in terms of citizens in the county and the county government, are there things that you're, I think you alluded to it earlier, are there things you take away, that's something we can do going forward, and it makes good sense?
Yeah.
Are there good things we've taken out of it? And it's hard to say good things and COVID in the same sentence, but right. Are there good things we've learned from the epidemic?
Yeah, I think every experience is a learning experience, right? So we try to take what we can out of it. I would say, if anything, it would just be, there's a few. There's the effort to make government more accessible to people without them having to go there. We've made an effort to put a lot more things online. There's no reason why people necessarily have to drive to Coquille every time they need something. We can figure out ways to get our services out to people through the internet or through outreach that mean that they don't have to drive all the way to Coquille and back in order to get the services they need. I mean, you and I have both driven to Coquille plenty. It's a half an hour from the edge of Coos Bay to the courthouse and then back. And we can be providing services to people in a way that doesn't require them to make that drive. Because for some people, it's an obstacle that's hard for them to overcome. I think it's also changed the way that we reach out to people. We no longer believe that just because we say it in a public meeting, everybody knows about it. We realize that we have to make more of an effort to communicate with our citizenry, especially when there's an emergency like this, and an emergency that has been like the world's slowest avalanche. We just watched it.
Yeah. And it seems like there's so many things that work just fine with Zoom or any other online meeting you want to do.
Right.
And there's some other things I think we'll all be anxious to get with, because in a Zoom meeting, it's hard to get feedback, and it's hard to see who wants to say something but isn't speaking. So that's going to be the challenge of what we can go to online and what we can stop doing online.
Right. But it is nice, because before, a lot of times, if there was a meeting in Salem and it was going to be an hour, I would have to ask, is there an option for a conference call? You were always that one from rural Oregon who was like, well, do I have to drive all the way there? And now that's the default. Everybody is saying, well, you can, we'll do it by Zoom, and if you don't want to do it by Zoom, you can call in. But it's the default to actually be able to call in or be on Zoom rather than having to drive 6 hours for a meeting that lasts an hour.
And the downturn sometimes is you miss those side conversations.
You do.
That as you walk out of the hearing, you connect with somebody that goes, yes, I have the same problem. And
right.
Those are the things that we're trying to figure out.
That is the hard part. You miss the relationship building part.
Yes.
So I don't think it'll ever completely take the place of in-person meetings. I think we've seen that people are anxious to get back to meeting other people in person. But I do hope for those little short meetings, for those times when we're not making hugely critical decisions and we're just doing an update and everybody's given the status of where their project's at, I would hope for those we could start using more of the technology that we have available.
We're training people to do that, I guess.
We're trying.
Yes, yes. Another in the last couple of weeks we had kind of it seems like a big announcement, though I suspect we've seen so many big announcements about Jordan Cove. We're never sure what really is thing, but it seems like it ran into another hurdle. Some would suggest a very big hurdle at the federal level to be able to get that going forward. What do you see happening with Jordan Cove? And do you have any insight into what's going on? And I guess if in fact it doesn't happen, where do you think the county goes from there?
Yeah, good question. I have no insight other than, we got our planning hearings remanded back. We have not yet received applications for the remand, so we don't have those scheduled. And that decision means that Jordan Cove will have to go through the DEQ process in Oregon, and they've already gotten denied on that. I am hesitant to ever take bets on whether or not that project will happen. You and I both know it's been going on for, I believe we're 15 years now into the application process. So, we've seen many times that people said the project's dead, the project's going to happen, back and forth. It's not government's job to necessarily decide, which projects happen and which ones don't. We just try to set the table, we put out a set of rules, and we say, if you can meet these criteria, then we'll give you a permit, and that's what we've done. I do think it would be great, and especially as we move forward, it'd be great to see Coos County engage in a visioning exercise. Other communities have done it. We can't do it obviously until the pandemic's over, because I think it requires people to be able to be in the same space. But to do something like Coos County 2050, to talk about what do our citizens want? How do we see ourselves 30 years from now? What kind of business do we want? Because I tell people all the time, if you don't like Jordan Cove, that's fine. And I'm not saying anybody has to like it, but if not them, then what? What do you think needs to happen for jobs for our citizens? You can't have a community without having some sort of jobs, without having industry. What direction do you see Coos County going? And I think we need to be asking those questions. We need to get our citizens together and have people sit down at the table together and say, this is the vision that we have for our community. This is what we want to be 30 years from now.
That's probably been the downside to having it hang over our heads for so long. As opponents, everybody's been kind of stopped waiting for the final shoe to drop one way or the other.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure we've had conversations about what we do if Jordan Cove happens or if it doesn't happen. So.
I agree. And I think that's the hardest part, is it takes all the air out of the room, because any conversation about what the future of Coos County looks like always turns that direction. And logically so, it's a big project. And so we get sidetracked onto that, and we never move on to the next part of the conversation about, if not, then what?
When you look at Coos County overall, what do you see as the biggest needs for the county to become vibrant and encourage business and grow the economy here? What are the things we need to do? Absent a discussion about Jordan Cove, what's out there that you could see would really help the county grow, develop, invite business in?
Yeah, we need family wage jobs. We need housing. Running Orca, that when you try to attract somebody to come here to work, and this has happened to me numerous times, you make somebody a hiring offer and they accept it or they're tentative on it, they come down and they look for a house and they can't find anything. And housing is expensive here, especially for the wages that we offer. So I think housing is an issue that we absolutely have to tackle, and have not just low-income housing, but workforce housing, and housing for the professionals that want to come to our area, because people do expect to be able to find a place to live if they're going to come down here and work.
What do you see as opportunities to do that? What do you see as opportunities for the county or others to develop it's workforce housing, at the lower to middle wage levels. There's the medical professionals that don't have housing. What does the county do or others do to encourage that? Because we've been talking about it seems, for about 10 years, and it seems like housing is still a premium down here.
It is.
Well, for the whole state.
It is. Nationwide, frankly.
What does the county do, or can the county do anything to make that work better or to develop housing?
Yeah, the county does some already. We've updated our ordinances, our planning ordinances, to try to make sure that we aren't serving as an impediment to people trying to develop housing. We do things like the project where Inglewood School had been destroyed and then left, and we partnered with the city of Coos Bay to clean that up and then it will be turned over to Oregon Coast Community Action to build housing after the cleanup is complete. And I think the important thing, and there's numerous little projects. I think the important thing is that we remember that our housing problem is probably going to be solved with these various small projects. Everybody always wants a big win. You want to bring in 300 house subdivision and just solve the whole problem at once. Frankly, I think it's a better use of our time and resources to look at where we can put in 5 units, where we can have these smaller wins, which are much more feasible. They pencil out better for the developers, and we're much more likely to get them done. One of the things that the county has started doing is when we take a property in foreclosure for taxes, if it's really in bad shape, we started having it demolished before we put the lot back up on the tax auction. And that means that when somebody buys it, at least it's development ready. Whereas before they had to find the money to tear it down, get rid of all the trash. It was an eyesore for the neighbors. It would attract rodents. Now at least we're turning over properties that are shovel ready, where people can get in there and build. And in many of them they've built duplexes or triplexes, which increases our rental housing supply.
A related conversation, I always say related because I don't think it's the same conversation, but a related conversation is the issues of homelessness in the county. And it seems, for you and I growing up here, it seems like it has escalated dramatically in the number of people on the streets, either in cars parked along the streets or motorhomes on the streets, people camping in areas, in some cases creating messes. The number of folks that we know that are struggling with addiction issues or mental health issues, or have kids in the child welfare system and can't find housing. How do we take that issue on? What is the county's role in taking that issue on?
That's really been a challenge, and we have Coos Health and Wellness. I think the thing is, most people look at the homelessness issue as being, one monolithic issue, and the truth is it's not. As you know well, it's not, a single issue. And it's really generally not a housing issue, although it is to some degree. If people had houses, then they wouldn't be homeless, obviously. But it's a substance abuse issue, it's a mental health issue. And then for some people, it's just people who dip into homelessness because of catastrophic events like COVID, where they lose their job and they're not able to cover their bills. Or, just a family medical illness that forces them out of a place that they've always been. But we need to be looking at them on a case-by-case basis. And we need to be putting more supports in place, especially to help those people that are just dipping into homelessness. Because those are the people that are the least likely to stay long-term homeless. And it's where we can invest the least amount of money and make the biggest impact. And then after that, we need to be ramping up our mental health resources. One of the difficulties we have down here, and this is how these things all kind of flow together, is we have a hard time attracting mental health professionals to work at Coos Health and Wellness. And some of that is related to our housing issue. If you come down here as a mental health therapist and you can't find a place to live, or the only place you find to live is a place that you wouldn't normally have expected to live after getting a master's degree, you're probably not going to stay here very long. You're going to go back up to Portland or Seattle or wherever it is, that has more housing that you like to live in. So we have to remember that housing is also critical to attracting and retaining those professionals that we need in our community to be able to provide those services. And access to healthcare is another one. I hear people talk about that all the time, the difficulty getting in to see a physician. And some of that is we have to have... And
access to child care is another one.
Absolutely.
That is a very difficult burden.
Yeah.
I've always noticed that the solutions for the homeless issue that exists, there's a million solutions, but the end answer is always in someone else's neighborhood.
Right.
We always, right. That's the difficulty, is we've got all kinds of things we want to do. Is where are we going to do it at that's not going to irritate somebody?
Yes, that is always the challenge. And trying to do it in a way that's thoughtful. Because the other thing we don't want to do is, a lot of times people will say, well, why don't we put them in an area of the county that's not very populated? Well, that's great, but they have no access to transportation. They have no access to services. It doesn't make any sense to put people with no transportation out in the middle of nowhere where they can't get food or services.
Shutter Creek being a classic example.
Exactly.
Might be a terrific location, but now you've added 10 to 15 miles to anybody's medical, needs,
Right.
shopping,
Employment. Just because you're homeless doesn't necessarily mean you're unemployed. There are people that are employed that are, for the record, homeless because they can't find a place to work for the wages, a place to live for the wages that they make.
I was in a conversation with a staff member I had that had come here 7 or 8 years ago, and the first place she lived, her and her partner lived in a camper out at Bassendorf Beach, which is what was a homeless issue, and they would shower in town. They had various jobs until they could afford to get housing, and they both became employed. She's actually doing very well, has a very nice position in Coos County, but that was her first housing, was a camper out on Bassendorf Beach.
Yeah. One of our attorneys moved here and couldn't find a house, so he ended up living at one of the extended stay motels until he could find a place.
So at the end here, if you could leave us with one thing you'd like to see happen in Coos County, or one thought about Coos County in the next year, what would that be?
Oh, I would just love to see Coos County more economically vibrant. I think we have a lot of people that are here because they love this place. People don't want to leave. And that's one of the challenges we have, especially when people can't find good jobs. So, economic vitality is what Coos County really needs, and we will get back there. I have a lot of hope for what they call a V-shaped recovery. So as soon as some of those restrictions go away, that our economy will come roaring back, and I'm hopeful that that we can get there in the next year.
Well, thank you for being here today. You can, when we get syndicated by the national networks with Eye on the Bay,
the
you
next
can say
Larry King.
You were the first guest on Eye on the Bay. But thank you very much.
I can't wait. Thank you so much.